My name is Curtis Halloway, and I'm 67 years old. Right now, my son Jonah and I are planting 120 acres of corn under a May sun that feels like forgiveness. The tractor hums steady. His hands are learning what mine forgot to teach him. But 5 months ago, on a January morning so cold the metal burned your skin, I stood at my frozen mailbox holding two envelopes that destroyed everything I'd built. Divorce papers, property transfer notice, 280 acres, 4 generations of Halloway blood and sweat, gone with a lawyer's gold pen and my wife's signature. Pierce Vandermeer stepped out of his black BMW that morning, Elaine on his arm, both of them laughing like they'd won something. He smiled at me, snow crunching under his Italian loafers. Your grandfather's farm dies today, old man. But Pierce didn't know about the brass tube hidden in my workshop wall. He didn't know what Earl Halloway had left behind in 1960, or that Grandpa's old survey equipment was about to save everything Pierce thought he'd stolen. The walnut smelled like honey when you planed it right. I'd been working on that dining table since November, measuring twice like Grandpa Earl always said, testing every joint 3 times before glue, 42 years married, 42nd anniversary coming up. Elaine deserved something made by hand, something that would outlast both of us. The hand plane made its music across the grain, that whisper scrape that means you've got the angle perfect. January sun came low through the north window, pale and cold, but enough to work by. The wood stove sat unlit in the corner. I didn't mind the cold when I was working. Kept your mind sharp. I ran my fingers along the table edge, checking for any rough spots my eyes might miss. Smooth as glass. Elaine would set her good china on this. Maybe have the church ladies over for one of those luncheons she loved. I pictured her running her hand across it the same way I was now, feeling the work in it. The wall panel behind my workbench caught my eye. Loose again, where the barn had settled over winter. I made a mental note to fix it come spring thaw. No rush. That panel had been loose since I was a kid helping Dad in here. Some things you learn to live with. Outside, gravel crunched. Elaine's Buick, 2 days early from her book club retreat in Des Moines. The back seat was packed with suitcases. I wiped the sawdust off my hands and headed for the house. The mailbox lock was frozen solid. I had to breathe on it twice before the key would turn. Inside, 2 certified letters, stiff with cold. First envelope, petition for dissolution of marriage. Elaine Margaret Halloway versus Curtis Eugene Halloway. The words didn't make sense at first, like reading a language you used to know. Second envelope, notice of property transfer. 280 acres, deed transfer to Vandermeer Holdings, LLC, effective in 90 days unless contested. My hands started shaking, not from the cold. The BMW pulled into my driveway before I could process what I was holding. Black, expensive, the kind of car that doesn't belong on gravel roads. Pierce Vandermeer got out first, adjusting his suit coat against the wind. Then Elaine from the passenger side, wearing a new wool coat I'd never seen, her face carefully blank. They walked toward me together. His arm slid around her waist like he owned her, like he owned everything. Curtis? Pierce's voice was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that makes working men feel stupid. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his inside pocket. I assume you've reviewed the documents. The wind cut through my work jacket. I could smell his cologne, something expensive that fought with the honest smell of diesel and winter earth that hung over the farm. What is this? My voice came out rougher than I intended. A clean break, Elaine said. She wouldn't look at me. It's time, Kurt. It's been time for years. The property transfer is generous, Pierce continued. He clicked his pen, a small, sharp sound that somehow felt like a threat. You'll have 90 days to vacate. We're willing to negotiate a small cash settlement for your personal effects. I looked at my wife, 41 years. She'd been 23 when we married, me 26, both of us young and scared and hopeful. I'd built this farm from 80 acres to 280, every fence post, every equipment payment, every dawn at the grain elevator. Elaine, I said. She finally met my eyes. They were cold as the January wind. Sign the papers, Kurt. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Pierce smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Sign it, old man, or we'll make sure your son Jonah inherits nothing but debt. I know people. I know things. Do you understand? The pen glinted in his hand, gold catching the weak winter sun. I understood plenty. I understood I was 67 with bad knees and liver spots, and he was 42 and looked like he stepped out of a magazine. I understood that Elaine had stopped looking at me like a husband somewhere along the way, and I'd been too busy working to notice. I understood that Pierce Vandermeer had studied the law the way a wolf studies sheep. I didn't sign. I stood there holding those papers while they got back in his car, while Elaine waved from the passenger window like she was leaving for another book club weekend, while the BMW pulled out of my driveway trailing exhaust in the frozen air. The neighbors' curtains moved. They'd seen it all. I stood there 30 minutes after they left, papers freezing to my hands, wondering if Grandpa Earl's old survey kit in the barn meant anything anymore, or if that was just another relic from a time when measurements and truth still mattered. The cafe went quiet when I walked in. Not silent. The coffee machine still hissed, the radio still played, but conversation quiet, the kind of quiet that's louder than noise. I'd been coming to Murphy's Cafe for 20 years. Same booth by the window, same burnt coffee, same faces. But that morning, 2 weeks after the papers, 3 men at the counter finished their eggs fast and left without looking my way. The waitress, Kelly, who always called me Hun, poured my coffee without a word and walked off before I could thank her. Lyle Bowen was the only one who sat down across from me. Didn't say anything at first, just pulled out his own thermos and poured coffee into the mug he'd brought from his truck. The smell of it, strong and honest, cut through the stale air. "Heard about Elaine?" he said finally. "Everybody's heard. Folks are talking. I bet they are." Lyle was 74, a widower 5 years now, with hands that looked like old leather and eyes that didn't miss much. He'd worked the farm next to mine since before I was born. We'd helped each other through bad seasons and good. "What are they saying?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. "That you worked her to death, that she deserves some happiness, that Pierce Vandermeer is a good man helping a woman in need." The coffee tasted like ashes. A woman at the next booth, Sandra Pierce, no relation to the lawyer, leaned over. "It's true, Kurt. You were never home. Always at that farm, always at the elevator. A woman needs more than a roof over her head." I didn't respond. What could I say? She wasn't wrong. I had worked. I'd worked like my father worked, like his father worked. Building something. Providing. Lyle slid a folded newspaper across the table. Front page, below the fold. Local attorney Pierce Vandermeer announces engagement to Elaine Halloway. The photo showed them at some restaurant in Des Moines. Elaine wore pearls I'd never seen. Pierce's arm was around her shoulders. They looked happy, young, even though Elaine was 64. I folded the paper and pushed it back. "There's more," Lyle said quietly. "He's been buying up foreclosed farms. 3 in the last year, paying cash, consolidating the land. People say he's got big plans for development. People say a lot of things." "Kurt," Lyle's voice dropped lower. "Be careful. Pierce Vandermeer isn't just some lawyer. He's connected. Judge Morrison, the county clerk's office, half the real estate agents in 3 counties. You go up against him, you're going up against the whole system." I thought about that as we sat there, steam rising from our coffee, the cafe's fluorescent lights humming overhead. Paul Briggs had an office above the hardware store on Main Street. The stairs creaked. The heating didn't work right. But he was the only lawyer in town who'd take my call. He listened to my story, took notes, then pulled up the county property records on his computer. The screen's glow reflected on his glasses. "Here's the problem," he said after 10 minutes. "The property transfer looks clean. According to county records, your wife filed a corrected deed back in 2019. Showing a boundary adjustment. You signed it, notary stamp, everything official." I never signed any boundary adjustment. Briggs turned the monitor toward me. There was my signature, or something close enough to pass. "That's not mine," I said. "Can you prove it?" I couldn't. I signed dozens of documents every year. Equipment loans, seed contracts, elevator receipts. Who keeps track? "Your wife worked as county clerk for 22 years, Briggs said. "She'd know how to file documents. She'd know what's legal." The words hit like a fist. Elaine hadn't just left me. She'd been planning this, using her position, her knowledge, her access to records I'd never thought to question. "How much to fight it?" I asked. "Retainer of $50,000 to start. Discovery, depositions, expert witnesses. You're looking at 6 figures total. Maybe more if Pierce drags it out." I had $8,000 in my personal account. The farm accounts were frozen pending the divorce. "And honestly, Kurt?" Briggs leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. "Pierce Vandermeer is good, real good. He and Judge Morrison play golf every Thursday. I've seen him bury 3 divorce cases in the last 2 years. The husband walks away with nothing." He said it quieter. "Off the record, you can't win this." Outside his window, Main Street was empty. January cold keeping everyone indoors. The hardware store's red sign buzzed in the weak afternoon light. I stood up, shook his hand. walked down those creaking stairs into air that smelled like road salt and defeat. My truck wouldn't start at first. The engine turned over 3 times before it caught. I sat there while it warmed, watching my breath fog the windshield, thinking about Elaine's 22 years in that courthouse. All those records, all that access, all that time planning how to take everything while I measured fence lines and fixed equipment and never saw it coming. Pierce Vandermeer had Judge Morrison. He had the county clerk's office. He had the law on his side. All I had was a frozen truck and a barn full of old tools nobody used anymore. The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor wax. I'd been there a dozen times over the years. Property tax payments, equipment permits, the usual farm business, but I'd never paid attention to the basement door behind the main desk. The clerk at the counter was new, some kid in his 20s with a name tag that said Derek. He barely looked up from his phone when I asked to see property records. "Everything's digital now," he said. "You can access it online." "I'd like to see the physical records." "Those are archived. We don't really, I'd like to see them anyway." He sighed, like I'd asked him to move a mountain, and disappeared into a back office. I waited 20 minutes. When he came back, he just shook his head. "Archivist says the records you're looking for match what's in the system. No discrepancies." I was about to leave when I heard a voice from the basement stairwell. "Curtis Halloway?" An older woman stood in the doorway, maybe 70, with gray hair pulled back and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore a cardigan that had seen better decades. "I'm Mabel Tyndall," she said. "I keep the real records." The basement was exactly what you'd expect. Low ceiling, exposed pipes, the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Banker's boxes lined metal shelves floor to ceiling, labeled in faded handwriting that went back 50 years or more. A single pull-chain bulb lit Mabel's workspace, a scarred wooden desk covered in ledgers and a cup of tea gone cold. "Derek doesn't know what he's looking at," Mabel said, guiding me past rows of boxes. "Kids these days think if it's not on a screen, it doesn't exist." "You know why I'm here? I know Elaine worked upstairs for 22 years. I know she filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. I know your farm's in play." She pulled out a metal folding chair for me. "And I know what it's like when someone you trusted takes everything." There was something in her voice, an old wound, still tender. "My ex-husband cleaned me out in 1991, she said, settling into her desk chair. "House, savings, even the car. Left me with nothing but this job and a furniture set from Goodwill. I've been down here 34 years now, and I learned one thing. Digital files can be altered, but these..." She patted a stack of ledgers. "These don't lie." The smell of mildew mixed with old leather bindings. Somewhere overhead, footsteps crossed the courthouse floor. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if Elaine used her access to change records, she'd have to change them everywhere. The computer system, yes, but also the hand-indexed ledgers we kept before 1985, before everything went digital." Mabel opened a drawer, pulled out a massive leather-bound volume. "Your property was surveyed and filed in 1962, when your grandfather expanded the farm. That entry should match what's in the digital system now." She ran her finger down a page of careful handwriting, each entry dated and signed. When she got to Halloway Earl, she stopped. "Property survey filed, April 1962. Conservation Reserve Payment Trust established. See Vault File 1960 HC 047. She looked up at me. "Does that mean anything to you?" "My grandfather died when I was 10. I barely remember him." Earl Halloway was thorough. Farmers back then didn't trust banks much after the Depression, but they trusted paperwork. If he filed a survey in '62 and established some kind of trust, there's documentation somewhere. She closed the ledger carefully. "Give me 3 days. I'll cross-reference everything, the original property lines, the deed transfers, the surveys. If something doesn't match, I'll find it." "Why would you help me?" Mabel's hands were spotted with age, trembling slightly as she stacked the ledgers. "Because they took my house, Curtis. They used the law like a weapon, and nobody helped me. I won't watch them do it to someone else." I sat there in that basement, surrounded by decades of paper truth, while the courthouse above us buzzed with digital certainty. 3 days, she said again. Her hand touched mine briefly, a grandmother's touch, warm and certain. "Don't give up yet." That night in my workshop, I couldn't settle. My hands wanted work, needed the focus that came from shaping wood. I pulled out a piece of scrap walnut. Nothing fancy, just something to plane smooth while my mind churned. The radio on the shelf crackled out weather and market reports. Temperature rising into the 30s tomorrow. First thaw of the season, brief but coming. I found myself staring at the anniversary table I'd built for Elaine. Still there, untouched, perfect joints and smooth finish. All that measuring twice, all that care. Measure twice, cut once, Grandpa Earl's voice in my head, clear as the day he taught me to use a handsaw. I started searching the barn for his old toolbox, the one with the surveyor's tape and levels he'd used when he expanded the farm back in the 60s. Found it behind the winter tires, rusty but intact. The surveyor's tape was there, but no transit, no precision instruments. The wall panel behind my workbench creaked in the wind that slipped through the barn gaps. I noticed it, filed it away, turned back to the wood. The radio cut to news. Pierce Vandermeer of Vandermeer Holdings LLC announced today the acquisition of his third foreclosed farm this month. Vandermeer calls it strategic land consolidation for future development. I set down the plane and listened to the wind and the creaking panel and the radio's steady voice telling me my world was changing whether I was ready or not. I heard the rental car before I saw it, a new SUV with Colorado plates, too clean for Iowa in February. Jonah climbed out wearing a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He's 38 now, works as a corporate accountant in Denver, drives a car with heated seats and makes more in a year than I ever did. He didn't hug me, just stood there in the driveway, hands in his pockets, looking at the farmhouse like it was something he'd rather forget. Dad. Jonah. We need to talk. Inside, I made coffee while he sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd taught him fractions, where we'd planned his college applications, where Elaine used to serve Sunday dinners. He pulled out a folder, the expensive kind with a leather cover. Mom showed me everything, he said. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed. The kitchen smelled like old linoleum and the faint ghost of yesterday's eggs. Everything, I said. The offshore accounts, the mistresses, the financial abuse. He opened the folder. Bank statements from the Cayman Islands, photographs of me with women I'd never met, credit card bills for hotels I'd never visited. Mom's lawyer documented all of it. My hands went cold around the coffee mug. Those aren't real, Jonah. They look pretty real to me. Account numbers, transaction dates, notarized affidavits. He pushed a photo across the table. Me standing next to a blonde woman outside some hotel, except it wasn't me. The face was wrong, the shoulders too narrow. You're going to deny this? Yes, I'm denying it, because it's not true. Mom said you'd say that. She said you'd lie and make her look crazy. His voice cracked. You chose this farm over us, Dad. Over me, over her, my whole childhood. You were here and not here. School plays, baseball games, my graduation. You were always at the elevator or the equipment shed or measuring some goddamn fence line. The words hit harder than I expected. Because he wasn't wrong, I had been at the elevator. I had missed games. I thought I was building something for him, for all of us. But what I'd really built was a wall between us, and I hadn't even noticed until it was too high to see over. I know I wasn't around enough. You weren't around at all. He stood up. Sign the papers, Dad. Give Mom what she deserves. Let her be happy for once. He walked toward the door, but something made him stop. The workshop was visible through the window, the barn door slightly open, light slanting across the anniversary table I'd built. He stared at it for a long moment. What's that? Nothing, just a table. When did you make it? Doesn't matter. But he was already heading toward the barn. I followed him through the cold, our breath fogging in the February air that was trying hard to feel like spring but couldn't quite manage it. Inside the workshop, Jonah ran his hand along the table edge. Smooth walnut, perfect joints, every corner measured 3 times, the kind of work that takes months and can't be faked. You made this? For your mother, for our anniversary. He looked at the table, then at me, then back at the table. Something shifted in his face, doubt creeping in around the edges of his certainty. I have to go, he said. He left without another word. I stood in the workshop listening to the rental car drive away, staring at that table and wondering if love was always too late or just too quiet to hear over the noise of leaving. Aisha was at the grain elevator the next week checking on stored equipment when Pierce found me. The elevator's metal silo rose up against a gray sky that couldn't decide whether to snow or rain. The wind carried the smell of diesel and old grain dust. He came around the corner fast, dress shoes slipping slightly on the gravel. No smile this time. His cologne hit me first, that expensive smell that didn't belong here among the machinery and honest dirt. "You went to the courthouse," he said. "Last I checked, that's not illegal. You're wasting everyone's time. The transfer is legal. The divorce is final. You've got—" He checked his watch, gold and heavy. 68 days left. Then you're out. Maybe. His face changed. The smooth lawyer mask cracked just enough to show something uglier underneath. He grabbed my coat collar with both hands, shoved me back against the cold silo wall. The metal rang dull under the impact. "Listen to me, you stubborn old fool." His face was inches from mine. I could smell coffee on his breath. "This land is mine. The house is mine. Everything you built is mine. And if you keep fighting, I'll make sure Jonah loses everything too. One phone call to his firm about family fraud, about your offshore schemes, he'll be out on his ass within a week. I'm 67, he's 42, stronger, faster, younger, but I've thrown hay bales and wrestled equipment and worked this land for 40 years. I pushed back, not hard, just enough to make space. You're scared," I said. "I'm not. You're scared I'll find something. That's why you're here, threatening me like some thug instead of hiding behind legal papers." His hands tightened on my collar, then released. He stepped back, adjusting his coat. The mask slipped back into place. 68 days, sir, he said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He walked back to his BMW. I stayed against that silo, heart hammering, knees shaking, tasting something like copper in my mouth. Lyle's truck pulled up 5 minutes later. He'd been loading grain, must have seen the whole thing through the warehouse window. He got out slow, walked over, didn't say anything at first, just stood there next to me while I got my breathing under control. "You all right?" "Yeah." "He put hands on you." I noticed. "I saw it, Kurt. I'll testify to that if you need me to." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of thawed earth and manure from the neighboring fields. February was trying to become March. Ice was starting to lose its grip. "He's scared, Lyle. That man is scared of something." Scared men are dangerous. My knees buckled then, just for a second, just enough that Lyle had to catch my arm. His hand was rough and steady, the kind of hand that had worked next to mine for 40 years. "Come on," he said. "I'll buy you coffee." "Not the cafe. Not the cafe. My kitchen, where nobody talks." We drove back to his place in silence. His kitchen smelled like old wood and the faint ghost of his wife's cooking. She'd been gone 5 years, but her recipes still lingered in the walls. He poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long, and we sat at his table, looking out at his fields and mine, all that land stretching out under a sky that was finally deciding on rain instead of snow. "He threatened Jonah," I said finally. "I heard. If I keep fighting, he'll ruin my son. Probably would too. So what do I do?" Lyle took a long sip of bitter coffee. "You ever notice how the loudest dogs are usually the smallest? Big dogs, they just sit there quiet. They don't need to bark. They already know they won." "What's that mean?" "Means Pierce is barking awful loud for someone who's already won." He set down his mug. "Means maybe he hasn't won yet. Means maybe there's something he's afraid you'll find." The rain started then. Cold February rain that wasn't quite spring but wasn't winter anymore either. It drummed on Lyle's tin roof and ran down his windows and turned the fields to mud that would take weeks to dry. I thought about Earl's survey equipment, about Mabel's 3 days in the courthouse basement, about Pierce's hands on my collar and the fear in his eyes under all that expensive cologne and practiced confidence. "I need to find what he's afraid of," I said. "Yeah," Lyle said. "You do." Mabel called on a Wednesday. Her voice on the phone was careful, measured, like she was weighing each word before letting it out. "Come to the courthouse, back entrance, 6 o'clock. "What did you find?" "Not on the phone." The line went dead. I spent the afternoon in the workshop trying to work, but mostly just moving tools around. The rain had stopped, but everything was wet, that deep February wet that gets into your bones and won't leave. The smell of damp wood and rust filled the barn. At 5:30 I drove to town. The courthouse looked different at dusk, its limestone walls gray against a darker gray sky. The back entrance was down a short flight of concrete steps, the kind of door nobody uses unless they work there. Mabel let me in before I could knock. The basement felt colder at night. The single bulb over her desk cast shadows that made the boxes look like sentries standing watch. She had a ledger open on her desk, an old one with a cracked leather spine, and pages so brittle they crackled when she turned them. "Sit down, Curtis." I sat. I found the original entry for your property, filed April 1962, surveyed by your grandfather Earl himself. She turned the ledger toward me. Property survey filed. Conservation Reserve Payment Trust established. See Vault File 1960, HC 047. What's a Conservation Reserve Payment Trust? Something the government set up in the late 50s to pay farmers for soil conservation. Your grandfather enrolled 80 acres in the program. The payments went into a trust account, compounded over time. She pulled out another document, this one protected in plastic. But that's not the important part. She pointed to a note in Earl's handwriting at the bottom of the survey. EP, resurvey if challenged. Trust Earl, 1960. EP, I said. Earl's initials backwards. He was leaving a message. He was leaving instructions. Mabel's hand trembled slightly as she touched the page. Your grandfather knew something, Curtis. He filed this survey with specific measurements, created a financial safety net, and left a note telling someone to resurvey if the property was ever challenged. But challenged by who? Why would anyone challenge it back in 1960? I don't know. But I compared the measurements in the survey to the current deed, the one Elaine filed in 2019. The property line is off by 40 feet on the eastern boundary, 40 feet that includes the access road to what used to be the Morrison grain silo, 40 feet that's now worth about $700,000 because of commercial rezoning. The number hung in the cold basement air. Elaine altered the deed, I said. She had the knowledge and the access, but here's the problem. Mabel closed the ledger carefully. This survey is old. Courts prefer modern documentation. And the original survey instrument, the transit your grandfather used, that's the only way to prove these measurements were accurate. Where is it? I thought about the barn, the rusty toolbox, the empty space where precision instruments should have been. I don't know. Find it, Curtis. Find it fast. You've got 59 days left. She walked me to the back door. Before I left, she put her hand on my arm, light, grandmotherly, steady. Earl knew, she said again. Knew enough to protect you 63 years before you needed protecting. Trust that. Trust the brass. The ice storm hit 3 days later. Not the gentle kind of winter weather you can prepare for, but the violent kind that tears through power lines and turns roads to skating rinks and reminds you nature doesn't care about your plans. I was in the workshop when the first crack sounded, loud as a gunshot. A branch came down on the barn roof, then another. The power flickered and died. I lit the kerosene lamp I kept for emergencies and checked the damage. Water was coming in through a new gap in the roof, dripping onto the north wall. The drip, drip, drip was steady, hypnotic. The smell of wet wood mixed with kerosene smoke. The wall panel I'd been meaning to fix, the loose one behind the workbench, had finally given up. The ice's weight had torn it halfway off, exposing the gap behind it. I pulled the panel the rest of the way. Behind it was a compartment I'd never known existed. Hand-built, careful carpentry from someone who knew what they were doing. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crackled when I touched it, a surveyor's transit, brass, heavy cold even through the cloth, and a brass tube. I unscrewed the cap with shaking hands. Inside, rolled tight, a survey map in Earl's handwriting. Yellowed paper, pencil lines still sharp, measurements precise. Property lines that didn't match the current deed. And at the bottom, 9 words that made my breath catch. Vandermeer foreclosure, 1987, predatory, filed county complaint, sun will come. The lamp flickered, the ice kept falling, and I understood. My grandfather had known, not everything, but enough. He'd surveyed truth and hidden it for the day someone would need it. He'd seen what happened to the Vandermeer farm in 1987, seen the pattern, filed a complaint, and left instructions. Pierce wasn't just stealing my land. He was finishing what someone started to his family almost 40 years ago. This was revenge, wearing a lawyer's suit and calling itself justice. The flyers appeared on a Tuesday morning. Someone had put them up overnight. On the church bulletin board, the feed store window, the cafe door, the bulletin board at the hardware store. Cheap printer paper, no signature, just words. Kurt Halloway, financial fraud, offshore accounts, mistress in Des Moines, ask him about the Cayman Islands. Lyle was tearing them down when I got to the feed store. He had a handful of them crumpled in his fist, his face red with anger that had nothing to do with the cold March wind. Coward didn't even sign them, he said. Let them stay up. The hell I will. Lyle. I put my hand on his arm. Let them. Anyone who believes that garbage isn't worth convincing otherwise. But he kept tearing them down anyway. moving from store to store with that stubborn determination you get from 74 years of not backing down from anything. I watched him go, then drove to the cafe. Inside was worse than I expected. The conversations didn't just pause when I walked in. They stopped dead. Kelly, the waitress, looked at me like I was something dirty that had wandered in off the street. "Coffee," I said. She poured it without a word. Her hand shook slightly, sloshing some onto the saucer. At a corner booth, Sandra Pierce and two other women from the church committee were huddled together. Sandra looked right at me. "Shame on you, Curtis Halloway, putting that poor woman through this." I drank my coffee and didn't answer. What Earl taught me was coming back now. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes the quietest man in the room is the strongest. But the hardware store owner wouldn't meet my eyes when I went in for screws. The clerk at the bank took 20 minutes to process a simple withdrawal. The man who'd sold me seed for 15 years suddenly didn't have time to talk about spring planting. I drove home through fields that were trying to wake up, snow melting into mud, frozen ground starting to soften, the world stuck between winter and spring and not sure which way to turn. That evening, my phone rang. The number wasn't one I recognized. "Mr. Halloway, this is Darcy Cole from Farmers Union Bank." Darcy. I knew the name. Her father had been vice president back when I first started farming. Her grandfather had worked there during the Depression. Banking family, 3 generations deep. "Someone requested your financial records this morning," she said. "Court order, signed by Judge Morrison. I stalled them on a technicality, said we needed to verify the account numbers. But Mr. Halloway, I can only hold them off for a few days." "Who requested them?" "Pierce Vandermeer's office." "Of course. But there's something else." Her voice dropped lower, like she was worried someone might hear. "My grandfather kept some old files in our vault, Depression-era stuff, mostly historical at this point. But I was going through them after your wife's property request came through, and I found something. An account under your name. Well, not your name exactly. Your grandfather's notation. For Raymond's grandson, Curtis. My father's name was Raymond. He died 20 years ago." "What kind of account?" "That's the thing. I don't know yet. The file reference is from 1960, and it's listed as a trust structure we don't use anymore. I need to go into the vault to pull the physical documents. Can you come tomorrow, around 9, before we officially open?" I said yes. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen with Earl's Transit on the table in front of me. The brass caught the lamplight and glowed like something alive. I ran my fingers over the engraved measurements, the careful calibrations, the weight of precision in my hands. The map was spread out next to it. Earl's pencil lines showing property boundaries that didn't match what Elaine had filed. 40 feet of difference. $700,000 of land that Pierce wanted badly enough to threaten my son, forge documents, and tear down my reputation with anonymous flyers. I photographed everything with my phone. Jonah had taught me that much on his first visit, before he still believed I was the villain. The transit, the map, the measurements, Earl's note about the Vandermeer foreclosure. Evidence, in case something happened to the originals. Then I wrapped the transit back in its oilcloth and hid it under the floorboards in my bedroom. Earl had hidden it for 63 years. I could keep it safe a little longer. The bank hadn't changed much since my grandfather's time. Red brick, built in 1947, with Art Deco details around the doors and windows that spoke of an era when buildings were meant to last. Inside, the teller cages were still brass, the counters still marble. The only concession to modern times was the computer on Darcy's desk. She was waiting for me at the side entrance. 55 years old, with her grandmother's eyes and her grandfather's careful way of moving. She led me through the quiet bank to the vault at the back, a massive steel door that probably weighed more than my truck. Inside, the safety deposit boxes lined the walls floor to ceiling. The air smelled like old leather and brass polish and money that had been sitting still so long it had forgotten how to move. "Box 1960 HC047, Darcy said, pulling out a long metal drawer. "H.C. Halloway, Curtis. Your grandfather opened it the year you were born." She set the box on a table and stepped back, giving me privacy. Inside, a passbook from Farmers Union Bank, brown with age. I opened it carefully. The first entry was dated January 15th, 1960. $50 deposited. Then nothing but compound interest entries year after year for 65 years. Current balance, $2,437,192.28. My hands went numb. There was more. Stock certificates, original shares of something called the USD Land Bank, 10 shares purchased in 1960 for $200 total. A note paperclipped to them in Earl's handwriting. Land bank shares, hold until needed, currently worth $180 per share. I did the math, 10 shares. In 1960, they'd been worth $20 each. Now, according to a penciled notation in Darcy's handwriting dated yesterday, $183,400 each, $1.8 million. And underneath it all, a letter. Sealed envelope with my name on it in Earl's careful script. I opened it with shaking hands. Dear Curtis, if you are reading this, you have reached the age of wisdom and found yourself in need. I knew nothing of your future when I wrote this, only that life has storms, and every man needs a harbor. Your father Raymond is a good man, but he thinks small. You, I believe, will think bigger. But even big thinkers can be brought low by circumstances they cannot control. I am a simple man who learned 3 truths. Time makes money grow. What is hidden cannot be stolen. Land outlasts lawyers. Use this gift wisely. Trust the brass, your grandfather, Earl Halloway. Beneath that, a newspaper clipping from 1987. Vandermeer farm foreclosed. Family alleges predatory lending. The photo showed a man and wife standing in front of a farmhouse, a young boy between them. The boy, maybe 4 years old, was crying. The caption, Pierce Vandermeer fought for, with parents Michael and Catherine Vandermeer losing family farm to foreclosure. And at the bottom of the clipping, Earl's handwriting again. Filed county complaint, predatory practices, lost battle but documented everything. Son will seek revenge. Be ready. I looked up at Darcy. She was watching me carefully, the way her grandfather probably watched people during the Depression, when money meant survival. He knew, I said. What? My grandfather. He knew Pierce's father lost the farm. He knew why. He filed a complaint about it, couldn't stop it, but he documented everything. And he knew that someday, somehow, the son would come looking for payback. Darcy leaned against the vault door. Pierce has been buying foreclosed farms for 3 years. Always cash. Always farms that border conservation land, or commercial zones. My dad mentioned it once, said it reminded him of something from the 80s, the way certain lawyers and banks would circle struggling farms like vultures. Does Pierce know about this account? Not from me, and it wouldn't be in any records Elaine would have had access to. Your grandfather set this up as a generational trust. It didn't even show up in our computer system when we digitized. I only found it because I went looking in the physical vault files. I sat there in that old vault, surrounded by decades of other people's locked away secrets, holding Earl's letter and thinking about time and patience and the long game. Pierce thought he'd won. He had the judge, the deed, the law on his side. He'd ruined my reputation and turned my son against me and counted down the days until I'd be forced off land my family had worked for 90 years. But he didn't know about the brass transit that proved his deed was a lie. He didn't know about Mabel's ledgers that documented Elaine's fraud. And he sure as hell didn't know about Earl's 65-year investment in patience. What do I do now? I asked. Darcy smiled, a small, careful smile that reminded me of her grandfather. Now you find yourself a lawyer, a real one, someone who isn't afraid of Pierce Vandermeer or Judge Morrison or anyone else. You know one? I might. My cousin Arthur practices in Des Moines. Big firm, estate law, the kind of lawyer who eats people like Pierce for breakfast. She wrote a number on a piece of paper. Tell him Darcy sent you. Tell him about the 1987 foreclosure and Earl's complaint. Tell him you have proof of deed fraud and $4 million to fight with. I looked at the passbook, the stock certificates, the letter. Why are you helping me? She was quiet for a moment, straightening the papers on the vault table. Because my grandfather helped your grandfather open this account in 1960. Because he believed in protecting farmers from vultures. Because, she met my eyes, Pierce Vandermeer is doing to you exactly what was done to his father, and that cycle needs to break. Jonah's car pulled into my driveway on a Thursday afternoon in early April, unannounced, like the first time. But when he got out, something was different. His tie was loose. His expensive coat was wrinkled. He looked like he'd driven straight through from Denver without stopping. We need to talk, he said. Come inside. The kitchen smelled like the coffee I'd been drinking all morning, trying to stay awake after another night of not sleeping. Legal documents covered the table. Arthur Blackstone had sent over preliminary filings, motions, discovery requests, the kind of paperwork that costs $500 an hour and feels like it's written in a foreign language. Jonah didn't sit down. He paced, running his hands through his hair. I found something, he said finally. At work. A client of ours. a shell company doing agricultural land acquisitions. I do their books, have for 2 years. Never thought much about it until last week when I was reconciling accounts and noticed the LLC structure. Multiple holding companies, all linked, all buying foreclosed farms in Iowa. He pulled out his laptop, opened a spreadsheet. Vandermeer Holdings, LLC, Pierce's company. But it's not just him. There are 8 other victim families, Dad. 8 farms bought under suspicious circumstances over the last 3 years. Total value, $12 million. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I ran the billing records, Jonah continued. Pierce charged Mom $340,000 in legal fees, against the farm equity, for a simple divorce that should have cost $30,000 maximum. His voice cracked. He was bleeding you both, using her to get to the land, then charging her for the privilege. Jonah, and there's more. He turned the laptop toward me. Text messages, screenshots of emails. I hacked Mom's iCloud. I know it's illegal, but I had to know. Dad, he's been threatening her, telling her if she doesn't finish the property transfer, he'll expose the deed forgeries. She'll go to prison. He showed me a photo, Elaine's wrist, a bruise dark as a thundercloud. She tried to back out 2 months ago. He grabbed her, threatened her. She's trapped, Dad. She made a mistake, got involved with him, probably thought he actually cared about her, but now she's in so deep she can't get out. I stared at that bruise, thinking about 41 years of marriage. The good years before I got too busy, the way she used to laugh at my jokes, the way we'd sit on the porch in summer and watch the corn grow and not need to say anything because the silence was enough. What are you saying? I'm saying she's a victim too. He seduced her for the land, then turned her into a criminal to keep her compliant. Jonah sat down finally, his hands shaking. Dad, I'm sorry. I believed her lies because I wanted to believe them, because it was easier to blame you than to admit Mom got played by a con artist. The anniversary table was visible through the window, still sitting in the workshop where I'd built it, untouched, a testament to love that came too late or too quiet. Do we destroy her? I asked. Turn over everything to the lawyers? Let her go to prison for fraud? Jonah looked at his laptop screen, at the evidence of Pierce's manipulation, at the bruise, at the text messages begging him to stop. That's up to you, he said quietly. You're the one she betrayed. I thought about Earl's letter, about time and patience in the long game, about how revenge is a short harvest and teaching is a long one. Your mother made her choices, I said, but Pierce forced her hand. We take him down, we let her walk. She altered legal documents, Dad. That's a felony. She did it under duress, under threat. We can prove that with what you found. I stood up, put my hand on Jonah's shoulder. I won't become Pierce, son. I won't ruin someone to feel like I won. Your mother and I, that's over, but I won't send her to prison. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I should have believed you. You're believing me now. That's enough. We spent the rest of the day at the kitchen table, building the case. Jonah's forensic accounting skills, plus Arthur Blackstone's legal knowledge, plus Mabel's archival evidence, plus Darcy's vault documents, plus Earl's transit and survey map. By evening, we had a strategy. Settlement conference, not a trial. Pierce would never agree to discovery, too much risk of his pattern being exposed. We'd corner him with evidence, force him to surrender the farm, accept disbarment to avoid criminal prosecution, and Elaine would testify, against Pierce, for herself, buying her freedom with the truth. Will she do it? Jonah asked. Only one way to find out. Arthur would contact her lawyer tomorrow. The settlement conference was scheduled for a week from Tuesday, April 23rd, exactly 14 days before the property transfer would become final. After Jonah left to get a hotel room in town, he was staying through the settlement, he said, not going back to Denver until this was finished. I went out to the workshop. The rain had stopped. April was trying hard to become spring. The mud was drying at the edges. The fields were ready for planting. Life was insisting on continuing whether we were ready or not. I touched the anniversary table one last time. All those hours of measuring, twice. All that care for something that would never be used for what I'd intended. Then I picked up Earl's transit from where I'd hidden it under the floorboard, wrapped it in clean cloth, and set it by the door. Tuesday, I'd bring it to the settlement conference. I'd measure truth in front of Pierce in his gold pin and his expensive suit. Earl had measured it in 1960. I'd measure it again in 2025. Some things don't change, no matter how much time passes. The conference room at Farmers Union Bank was all polished wood and leather chairs, the kind of space designed to make serious money feel respectable. Arthur Blackstone had chosen it deliberately. Neutral ground, not a courtroom, but official enough to carry weight. Pierce arrived first, 15 minutes early, with two associates carrying briefcases thick with paperwork. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my tractor payment, shoes shined to a mirror finish. When he saw me sitting there with Arthur and Jonah, his smile was confident, the smile of a man who'd already won. Curtis, still wasting everyone's time, I see. Arthur stood, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts. Mr. Vandermeer, thank you for agreeing to settlement discussions. I think we can resolve this efficiently. The county mediator, a woman named Patricia Chen, sat at the head of the table. She'd brought a court reporter. Everything said here would be on record. Pierce settled into his chair, unbuttoning his suit coat. Let's make this quick. The property transfer is legal. The divorce is final. Mr. Halloway has 12 days to vacate. I don't see what there is to discuss. Just a few irregularities we'd like to clear up, Arthur said mildly. He nodded to Mabel, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. She stood carrying a leather-bound ledger like it was the Bible itself, set it on the table between them. This is the original property record from 1962, Mabel said. Her voice was steady, grandmother firm. Hand-indexed, filed by Earl Halloway, predating your digital system by 23 years. The property boundaries recorded here, she opened to the marked page, differ from the deed Mrs. Halloway filed in 2019 by 40 feet on the eastern boundary. Pierce barely glanced at it. Old records. Courts prefer modern documentation. They do, Arthur agreed, which is why we'll note that the modern documentation was filed by Mrs. Halloway herself during her tenure as county clerk, a position that gave her unfettered access to deed records and the technical knowledge to alter them. You're accusing my client. I'm observing facts. Mrs. Halloway had means, motive, and opportunity to alter county property records. The original survey contradicts the current deed. That's not accusation, that's documentation. Pierce's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed smooth. Circumstantial. Any competent surveyor would tell you property lines shift over decades. Erosion, natural boundary change. Jonah slid his laptop across the table. Let's talk about your business model, Pierce. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Pierce's face. Over the last 3 years, Jonah said, Vandermeer Holdings LLC has acquired 8 foreclosed farms in 3 counties. Total value, $12 million. Each acquisition followed the same pattern. Legal fees charged against farm equity, deed corrections filed during transition, property lines mysteriously adjusted to include commercially valuable land. Pierce's associates exchanged glances. That's privileged financial information. It's public record, Jonah said. LLC filings, county deed transfers, commercial rezoning applications. I'm a forensic accountant. This is what I do. You left a trail, Pierce. A very clear trail. The conference room's air conditioning hummed. Outside the window, April rain started pattering against the glass. Soft, steady, the kind of rain that makes things grow. Interesting pattern, Arthur said. But let's get specific. You billed Mrs. Halloway $340,000 in legal fees for a straightforward divorce. Care to explain why? Complex asset division? Or were you bleeding the farm's equity to ensure maximum property acquisition value? Arthur opened his own folder. We have documentation showing Mrs. Halloway attempted to withdraw from your representation twice. Both times, you threatened to expose her role in the deed alterations. That's coercion, Mr. Vandermeer. That's using the law as a weapon. Pierce stood up. This is slander. I'm not sitting here. Sit down, Patricia Chen said quietly. You agreed to this conference. You'll hear the evidence. He sat, but his hands were shaking now, just slightly, as he poured himself water from the crystal carafe. I stood then, walked to my bag, pulled out the oilcloth bundle, set it on the table between us and unwrapped it slowly. The brass transit gleamed under the conference room lights. My grandfather's surveying equipment, I said. Used to establish the original property boundaries in 1960, still calibrated, still accurate. Pierce stared at it like I'd put a snake on the table. Arthur unrolled Earl's original survey map. These measurements, taken with this instrument, establish the property line 40 feet west of where your current deed claims it to be. 40 feet that includes the access road to the former Morrison silo. 40 feet that was commercially rezoned last year for $700,000. That doesn't prove... It proves the current deed is fraudulent, Arthur said. It proves Mrs. Halloway altered county records. And it proves you knew about it, benefited from it, and coerced her into completing the fraud. He pulled out another document, yellowed newspaper protected in plastic. 1987, Vandermeer Farm foreclosure. Your father, Michael Vandermeer, alleged predatory lending practices, lost the family farm. Arthur looked at Pierce. Your grandfather, Earl Halloway, filed a county complaint supporting your father's claim. He tried to help. The complaint was dismissed, but Earl documented everything. He even wrote a note. Son will seek revenge. The color drained from Pierce's face. This isn't about money for you, Arthur said quietly. It's about payback. Your father lost his farm, so you're taking Curtis's. You're doing to him what was done to your family. The cycle of hurt, continuing. Pierce's hand knocked over the water glass. It spilled across the table, soaking papers dripping onto the carpet. Nobody moved to clean it. The door opened. Elaine walked in. She looked older than I remembered, older than 3 months should make anyone look. Her hair had more gray. Her face had lines I'd never noticed. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, no makeup. She looked like the woman I'd married 41 years ago, before country clubs and book clubs and lawyers with gold pens. Pierce stood. Elaine, you don't have to. Yes, she said. I do. She sat down at the table, her hands folded in front of her like a schoolgirl. Didn't look at me, didn't look at Pierce, just looked at Patricia Chen and said, I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. Pierce grabbed the edge of the table. If you do this, you'll go to prison. Maybe, Elaine said, but at least I'll sleep at night. She placed a folder on the table. Inside, copies of text messages, emails, photos of bruises, a timeline of Pierce's threats, his manipulation, the way he'd seduced her for access to the farm and then trapped her with her own crimes. I forged documents, she said, her voice steady. I used my position as county clerk to alter property records. I did it because Pierce told me it was legal, told me it was just correcting old errors. By the time I understood what I'd done, he had evidence of my crimes. He said if I didn't finish the property transfer, he'd make sure I went to prison. Her hands trembled. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I betrayed my husband. I broke the law, but Pierce Vandermeer used me like a tool, and when I tried to stop, he threatened me, hurt me. She finally looked at Pierce. You told me you loved me. You told me we'd build something together, but all you wanted was revenge for something that happened before either of us were born. Pierce stood abruptly. This is coerced testimony. She's lying to save herself. Sit down, Mr. Vandermeer, Patricia Chen said. He didn't sit. He looked at Arthur, at the transit, at Elaine's folder of evidence, at Jonah's laptop showing his pattern of fraud. He looked at me, holding Earl's survey map like a shield against 40 years of anger. You can't prove any of this, he said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Arthur smiled, not kind, not cruel, just satisfied. We can prove all of it. Deed fraud, coercion, a pattern of predatory land acquisition, 8 victim families ready to testify, a county clerk willing to confess, and a 65-year-old survey that proves your entire case is built on falsified documents. The rain kept drumming on the windows, spring insisting itself on a world that wasn't ready. Here's what happens now, Arthur said. You sign the property transfer reversal. The farm goes back to Curtis Halloway, free and clear. You accept voluntary disbarment to avoid criminal prosecution, and you walk away. And if I don't, then we go to trial. Discovery, depositions, 8 victim families, national media coverage of a lawyer who used his position to steal farms and revenge his father's foreclosure. Criminal charges for Mrs. Halloway, yes, but also for you, fraud, coercion, racketeering. Arthur leaned forward. You're good, Pierce, but you're not that good. You left too many victims. They're all ready to talk. Pierce looked at Elaine. She looked back at him without flinching. He sat down, pulled the transfer reversal document toward him. His hand shook as he signed. Pierce left first, his associates trailing behind like pallbearers at a funeral nobody wanted to attend. He didn't look back. The sound of his expensive shoes on the marble floor faded down the hallway, and then he was gone. Elaine signed the quitclaim deed in silence. Her signature was smaller than I remembered, less confident. When she finished, she set the pen down carefully and looked at me for the first time since she'd walked into the room. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words, 41 years reduced to 2 words. I nodded. That was all I could manage. She stood, gathered her purse, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. The table you made, the walnut one in the workshop. Her voice cracked. It's beautiful, Kurt. I wish I'd told you that when it mattered. Then she was gone too. Jonah put his hand on my shoulder. You okay, Dad? I don't know yet. The legal aftermath took 3 weeks. Pierce surrendered his bar license on May 2nd, avoiding criminal charges, but ending his career. The State Bar Association opened investigations into his 8 other cases. 2 more victim families filed lawsuits. The Des Moines Register ran a story. Attorneys fall, revenge, fraud, and foreclosure's long shadow. Elaine moved in with her sister in Omaha. No criminal charges filed. Arthur argued successfully that she'd acted under duress, was herself a victim of Pierce's manipulation. The judge agreed, gave her 2 years probation and community service. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office. Back where she'd started in 1983, before we got married, before the farm, before everything, I didn't hate her. I'd thought I would, but I didn't. Mostly I felt tired, and sad for what we'd lost, and sad it had taken losing everything to realize we'd lost it years ago. Mabel retired from the courthouse basement in late May. At her party, she pulled me aside and pressed a small package into my hands. Earl's ledger pages, she said. Copies. Keep them safe. Remember what he taught you about patience. I framed one of the pages, the entry showing the 1962 survey, and hung it in my workshop next to the transit mounted on the wall. Earl's handwriting, careful and precise, a message from the past that had saved the future. Darcy helped me set up trusts for Jonah's future, for grandchildren I didn't have yet but might someday. Most of Earl's money I kept untouched, invested carefully. The farm didn't need saving anymore, but the lesson remained. Time makes money grow, and patience beats revenge every time. Lyle came over one evening in mid-May with a casserole from his freezer and a bottle of whiskey that had been sitting in his cabinet since his wife died. 2 survivors, he said, pouring 2 glasses. To stubborn old men, I said. We sat on my porch, watching the sunset, paint the fields gold, listening to the spring birds and the distant sound of a tractor somewhere over the rise. The air smelled like growing things and rain that hadn't fallen yet, but was coming. You ever gonna forgive her? Lyle asked. Already did. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, though. Doesn't mean going back. No, he agreed. It doesn't. We finished the whiskey as the stars came out. Lyle drove home slow and careful, his taillights disappearing down the gravel road like red eyes blinking out. I stood there in the dark for a while, listening to my land breathe. 280 acres. 4 generations of Halloway sweat and hope and stubbornness. It had almost been taken, almost been lost to revenge that started before I was born. But Earl had known, had measured truth and hidden it and trusted that someday someone would need it. He'd played the longest game there was, and he'd won from beyond the grave. Inside, I could see the workshop lights still burning, the transit on the wall catching the glow. I'd touch it in the morning like I did every morning now, a talisman, a reminder, a promise. Land outlasts lawyers, Earl had written. He'd been right about that. He'd been right about everything. Jonah came back the 3rd week of May with his belongings packed in a U-Haul. Said he'd quit the Denver job, wanted to learn the farm, wanted to make up for lost time. We spent a week fixing equipment and walking the fields and not talking much because sometimes the work says more than words ever could. Planting season came warm and ready. We climbed onto the old John Deere together, him at the wheel, me guiding his hands, teaching him what my father taught me and his father taught him. How to keep the rows straight, how to read the soil, how to trust the land to do its part if you do yours. Tell me about Great-Grandpa Earl, Jonah said as we worked. So I did. Told him about the factory worker who understood money better than bankers. About the man who measured truth with brass instruments and hid it for 65 years. About patience in the long game, and how revenge is a short harvest but teaching lasts generations. The tractor hummed steady beneath us. The sun warmed our shoulders. Behind us, the turned earth lay black and ready, and ahead of us, the fields stretched out green with last year's cover crop waiting to be turned under. At noon, we stopped for coffee from the thermos, sat on the tractor watching barn swallows build nests in the rafters of the equipment shed, new life insisting itself everywhere you looked. Think you'll ever get married again? Jonah asked. No, that part of my life is done. I looked at the farmhouse, the barn, the workshop where Earl's transit hung on the wall. But this isn't done. This keeps going, through you and your kids someday and their kids after that. He smiled, put his hand over mine on the tractor wheel. We planted until sunset, painted everything gold, father and son, 2 generations, working land that 4 generations had protected. The corn would grow. It always did. Winter breaks everything it touches. But spring doesn't care. It grows anyway. That's the secret Earl knew. That's what he left me to give to Jonah. time, and patience, and the certain knowledge that land outlasts lawyers every single time.